I'm back in business. Myself, Ben Rasa here with Ship My Money, Adam Scherer. Thanks for Lofty for filling in for me last week. I was in Florida. I don't think I missed too much, but how are you doing on this Thursday morning?
Doing good. Nice 4-game slate with a bunch of terrible teams that have a lot of injury news, so
A
it should be a
lot.
fun one.
Yeah, I looked at the slate. I said, all right, 4 games. We're not going to have that much. God, just between honestly, the Raptors and the Warriors, that could be a whole separate show just with the
Yep.
amount of guys that are questionable. Before we dive in, a couple things. First, I wanted to just ask you, it was a big slate last night. How did it go?
Not well. I don't remember what went wrong, but
Something.
it's all run together at this point of what goes wrong every single night. But yeah, it didn't. I mean, it wasn't like a terrible slate, but it was just your normal like losing slate.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the golf world Wednesday night and college basketball. You know how it goes over here. But I do want to say last night, we did some really cool things with Super Draft, who is sponsoring this show as well. We did some fun giveaways and trivia, and we're going to have plenty of stuff like that all coming up on all the different formats. But they're changing the game with their multiplier mode, as you guys know. No salary constraints over there. You have your top guys. They're the 1x. And then as you go down, you get that multiplier mode. You get incentivized to maybe take some shots. So if you haven't signed up and you want to, promo code AWESEMO, you get $20 free on your first deposit of $100 or more. We'll be talking about that throughout the show. But as you said, 4 games, some pretty ugly ones. And I mean, we can get right to it if you want. And the first one to me, I think is the ugliest. Denver, 10-point favorite on the road in Charlotte, 208 total, which no surprise it's the lowest by 10 plus points. What do you make of, I guess we can start with Denver. They blew an absurd game against the Warriors the last time out. 10-point favorite here. It's hard to imagine they would lose this game, but what's your first thoughts on the Nuggets?
So my very first thought is that the total looks right because Lofty asked me on the podcast last night. We didn't have a line yet. He asked what I thought it would be, and I said 208.
Lines maker over here.
Yeah, so obviously agree with that. But from the Denver side, I mean, the issue is that both of these teams just play so slow, especially Charlotte, as we've talked about, by far the slowest team in the league. They don't have a good defense, though, especially in the paint. So I think Jokic still looks like an appealing option. He should be really productive. The only issue is, how slow the game is and the lack of possessions. Same goes for Plumlee, playing the backup center minutes. I would expect typically you're going to get 32 to 33 minutes from Jokic, 15 to 16 from Plumlee. So I still think Jokic looks pretty good. You could look to Jamal Murray, who's still affordable and playing big minutes for Denver as well. But beyond that, I don't think a whole lot's appealing from the Nuggets.
Yeah, Jokic, 9,900 on FanDuel, 95 on DraftKings. You can certainly pay up for him if you want. We'll just see. We say this on every slate. The more value that opens up, of course, it's going to be easier to get in these top tier guys if you want him along with a Westbrook or a Harden. We'll get there when we get there. Jamal Murray is interesting. That's a guy that I kind of like as well. He's 6,800 on DraftKings, 3 of 14 in the last game against the Warriors. That was one of the many reasons they blew that lead. But he's in an interesting price point. I don't want to switch to Charlotte just yet. But on the other side of this game, you have some guys at a similar price point in Rozier, and we'll see what that really generates. But I kind of like Jamal Murray as well. In terms of the other guys, do you have any interest in like the wings for Denver? I know there's a lot of bodies. We talk about Barton, Harris, guys like that.
Not really. The pricing on them isn't bad. Millsap's only 4,600. Grant, same price. Barton's at 5,600. So with it being a 4-game slate, I could see how those guys, end up getting into some lineups. But just because of the pace of the game, I don't really want to deal with them.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's a weird blend because, it's only 4 games. So we're going to be forced into some uncomfortable positions. It's not 2 games where you really are playing almost a different format and it's about raw points. You'll have some options here, but at the same time, you're going to have to probably look to some of these guys over on Super Draft. No surprise, we really don't have anyone way up there in terms of the multiplier because we've got Harden and guys like that. Jamal Murray 1.5x. And, again, that's to be expected. Jokic 1.05x if you're looking to go there at the center position. But I mean, it's just a game that I expect the Nuggets to win. I did not bet it. I have no interest in betting it. slow, ugly, 208 total. I think we can switch the other side. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Now we got maybe my least favorite team in the league. I'm not going to lie. I don't like the Hornets. They annoy me. I bet the under on their win total. That was a loss for the year, and they're still terrible.
Was it really? I have no idea what their record is. I just would have assumed that they weren't.
Yeah, you would think that, right? They're 21-40.
Oh, wow.
Which is better than I thought they would be. That's for sure. We got Malik Monk is highly suspended. One of the many question marks, Devontae Graham on the slate. He's got an ankle. He's questionable. That's going to be important. Now, we can do it both ways because we only have 4 games, so we can get into it. If he plays, do you have any interest in him specifically?
A little bit, just because he's down to 5,800, but I don't think he's good either. So,
Okay.
like he's been a really interesting player because he's obviously he's young. He started out the year really, really hot, and you see this in like all sports, but it's like people have a tendency to, if you're hot the first month of the year and then cool off, they like think that you're just in a slump. But if you like start out poorly and then get hot, they understand that it was just a hot streak. But like I don't. When Graham was playing really well, everyone was kind of losing their minds. Like, how is Devontae Graham playing this well? I don't think he's that guy. I don't think he's that good. I think he's I think he's more your 0.85 to 0.9 fantasy point per minute guy than the 1+ point per minute guy he was at the beginning of the year. So with his price tag coming down, it does start to at least give you a nice ceiling because he plays so many minutes. But I still don't think that he's underpriced as far as median projection goes, at least. So if his ownership is down, which right now we have him around 9 or 10% on DraftKings, then I think there's some appeal just because of the minutes that he plays, but I still wouldn't have much confidence in him.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I feel like we'll get word on what the status is. I don't think it's going to be too popular for a 4-gamer, and that is interesting in itself. But then just switching to the front court, and then we'll go back and do this again if he sits. Do you expect going up against a big Nuggets team, you mentioned Plumlee, you mentioned Jokic, that we may see some more run for a guy like Zeller for Washington? Do you think the Hornets maybe play big in a spot like this and help the front court?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance of that. Obviously, we'll have to see what the starting lineup is because we had Biyombo starting a few games. Last game, you got Zeller starting and Biyombo taking the DNP. Against the front court with Jokic and Plumlee playing 48 minutes at center, though, I wouldn't be surprised if, one, you get, instead of like last game, Zeller played 20 minutes, Hernan Gomez played around 18, and then you got, like some PJ Washington. I wouldn't be surprised if you get like 26 minutes out of the starter and then 18 to 20 from Hernan Gomez. I wouldn't be shocked either if maybe you get like 24 from Zeller and then like 12 apiece from Biyombo and Hernan Gomez or something. I just think that there's a good chance that you get closer to 48 minutes from the centers, but the starting lineup will really tell a lot about who that impacts because obviously we don't know yet if it's going to be Zeller or Biyombo starting.
Yeah, Hernan Gomez 3,800. Do you have interest there? I mean, I guess it's going to depend on how much other value opens up, but if he gets 18-ish, something like that, could you see finding some exposure?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends on what other value opens up because his price tag has come up enough where, even the difference between like 3,800 and 3,200 matters when you're talking about someone that's typically going to play around 18 minutes. But he's about a point per minute guy. And I think, projecting him for around 18 points in this game is reasonable. So if we don't get a lot of other value, then I think he becomes useful.
And then so the other guys, and this is where it ties back to Devontae Graham, you've got Bridges. You certainly have Rozier, who would be the main beneficiary in terms of usage. If Graham sits, are those guys like elevated towards the top of your list, or you still have marginal interest?
The problem is still like, so you get a lot more, you get more usage for those guys. You get more assist opportunities for Rozier. The problem is still that they're not that they're not very good. They're in a tough spot at going against Denver, and the ownership is going to skyrocket if Graham is out. So I think that they're obviously better plays. I think that especially in cash games, you'd be looking to Rozier, at only 6,200. Bridges would be fine at 5,700. But there's definitely a point ownership wise in tournaments where I'd be looking to pivot away from Rozier pretty quickly to someone like Jamal Murray if the ownership really goes up if Graham is out.
Yeah, I'm with you on that point. Exactly. I think Jamal Murray is interesting. Certainly, if Graham sits, there's a direct correlation there in between the ownership that's going to rise. And then, I mean, since again it's 4 games and ownership will tell the tale on a lot of these guys. Do you have any interest in other punts like Jalen McDaniels, 3,600 on the Hornets, or is that just reaching?
I think it's reaching. He had a good game last game, but I I'm pulling up popcorn machine now. I'm pretty sure. Maybe I'm wrong. I thought Caleb Martin had a little bit of an injury and lost some minutes, but you got 27 minutes from McDaniels, 27 from Caleb Martin, and 34 from Cody Martin in that game. None of them are productive players. Cody Martin obviously had a good game, but he shot I think like 6 of 7 or 6 of 8 or something like that. Um, Low usage guys, price tag coming up. I wouldn't be going back to much Cody Martin. I didn't have much of him last game. I'd have even less this game. Um, McDaniel's price jumped from 3K to 38 or 3,600. I don't think I'd be getting to much of them.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in line with that. Like I said, if there's no value, if all these Q tags play, I still probably won't get there, but you'll certainly see it being closer for me. And yeah,
Yeah. I like that. That's the problem with Charlotte is the whole team is kind of in that like Terry Rozier situation where the, their marginal plays in their matchup and at their price points, but the slate might force them into being better plays. But all that means is that their ownership is going up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of situations like that, and we see that. I think if you want to talk about a macro 4 gamer for a second, in 4 game slates, what happens is you find a lot of fringe plays that you may be forced into. But one of the problems is it's only 4 games, so you're not the only person seeing that, and then you end up playing guys that are in a vacuum kind of over owned, and that's really where you try to find the right balance with something like this. But any final thoughts on what is clearly the worst of the 4 games?
No, that's it.
No. Okay. Let's get rid of that. This is probably the best game. Clips, Rockets. It's I see it as pick 'em right now on my screen. We'll have to see where that goes. 236 on the dot, highest on the slate. Not a surprise there. The Rockets are at home. Big game. So we've got Westbrook, we've got Harden right now, and of course ownership will change. Keep an eye on that as the day goes on. We've got them as 2 of the highest owned guys on the entire slate, but they're really close in ownership. I thought that we'd see Westbrook maybe a little lower owned than Harden. If they are the same in terms of ownership, are you just going to take Harden, or do you still have interest in Westbrook?
I would still have interest in Westbrook, but I agreed with you. I think that as the day goes on, we start to see Westbrook's ownership come in a little bit lower. That's just been the trend that we've gotten recently, and it makes sense because if you're using year long or longer projections, Harden is clearly the better DFS guy to Westbrook. So when their salaries are close, you're going to get more Harden, and with their salaries being close recently, we've typically seen like 2x the ownership on Harden compared to Westbrook. So if they are actually still projected to be about the same, as we get closer to lock, I would give the slight edge to Harden, just again based on historical data and the fact that he's been the better producer. He gives you the 3 point upside on DraftKings too, but I think that it's still worth mentioning that at this point, I think Westbrook and Harden project really similarly. You've seen over the last couple of months in games that they've both played, Westbrook's taken on more usage. I think that's kind of been a combination of multiple things. Harden was banged up for a little bit, but also teams, scheming differently against Harden. But also with the personnel on the Rockets now, I think it really benefits Westbrook. There's so much spacing. There's no center in the middle of the floor. It's really easy for him to get to the basket. You've seen his drives per game go up. So I think that he does project very similarly to Harden for me now.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt on that. They're both 1x on Super Draft. I just usually it's not enough salary difference for me, but the ownership difference is significant where I end up leaning Westbrook more often than not. If this is basically best available player, Harden would certainly get the boost there. You're not going to go wrong with either of these guys. The more value that opens up, of course, the easier it'll be to get them in. The next guy I want to talk about is their new addition, who certainly found a home here, is Covington. He's 6,700. I think he's fine. The minutes should be there. It's a good spot. Do you have any interest, or is it too premium in terms of price tag?
Yeah, I still have interest because I just find this game so appealing. Like, it wouldn't be surprising at all if you got like playoff type minutes in this game
Yeah.
between these two teams. And Covington, while the price tag, there is some sticker shock because it's Robert Covington and he's $6,700. He's playing big minutes, and the rebounding numbers have gone up since going to Houston, which makes a lot of sense. And even though he's not a high usage guy, you're getting efficient looks for him because of playing with Harden and Westbrook. So I think that it's a really good spot for him in general playing on the Rockets. And I just think that this game is a really appealing game, especially in the context of the other three dumpster fires on this slate.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, in Covington right now, ownership looks pretty standard. We see him, in the high teens, and that's going to change. Over on FanDuel at 6,500, again, good enough price tag. He's more popular over there, up to 28% right now. We'll see where it goes. After that, though, I mean, with the Rockets, it's a weird team to break down. You have the two alphas, you have Covington, and then it's just bunts. You've got House, you've got Eric Gordon, PJ Tucker. These are the type of guys, they're in that Hernangomez punt range. I assume in a good game that you have some interest there, even though they're kind of blah plays.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's just that they're so cheap, and I find this game so appealing. The problem, PJ Tucker is another one of those guys where anytime it's remotely viable to roster PJ Tucker, his ownership just jumps to like 25%, and you don't want to do it anymore. So, he is a good value, I think, just based on the minutes in the game. Right now, we have him projected for like 25% ownership. We have Hernangomez at the same price at 10%. I'll take my shots on Hernangomez if that holds, but Tucker is certainly viable just because of the price tag. Eric Gordon, same thing, 3,800 projected for 26% ownership right now. Played 23 minutes against the Knicks in their last game. His minutes are down a little bit because of having all these other wings to contend with now. You have Green, you have McLemore still playing, you have Rivers, you have Tucker, House, Covington. So you're not getting those 30-minute games from Eric Gordon, at least recently. And with Westbrook and Harden both playing, his usage is pretty much non-existent. But he's still cheap. And then the same goes for Daniel House as well.
It's tough. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Honestly, PJ Tucker is like one of the best examples of what we were just talking about. Like, I would never, PJ Tucker is a guy that I get to on shorter slates, and then he's owned to the point where I'm just like, I don't want to play him. Eric Gordon, 1.65x over on Super Draft. Don't mind that price. Other than that, though, I mean, like I said, you have three of them there. They're going to fill every position. They all have different positions on DraftKings. Gordon and House, multi-position eligible. It's appealing, but at the same time, it's very tough to prioritize. I talk about this on all sports, golf, NBA. I hate situations where it feels like you have to get it right twice. Like, if you're punting with Houston, you've got to get it, that you hope they play well, and then you got to pick the right one, which makes it even more difficult.
Yeah. One thing for large field tournaments to point out with Houston too is, because obviously, at least the way the slate looks right now, the value on this team is really useful, but it's also highly owned and highly questionable in terms of production. If you're just looking for like that kind of leverage pivot, Jeff Green has been the backup to PJ Tucker, and typically you're getting 33, 34 minutes for Tucker, 14, 15 minutes for Jeff Green. If PJ Tucker got in foul trouble or something, I think Jeff Green would be the immediate beneficiary in terms of minutes. And he's like 1/10 the ownership.
Yeah, I mean, he's the flat min. That's a YOLO play.
Yeah. I mean, it's not something you should have a lot of at all.
But you don't need a lot.
Right. Just something to keep in mind where the median projection on Jeff Green is going to be really low, but that 3% of the time or whatever that he comes through, he's kind of just nuking like a large percentage of the field.
Yeah, and that's a build. Other than him, I don't see many. Well, actually, there's a guy on the other side that's kind of like that for me. Also,
that's actually what made me think of Jeff Green was.
Yeah, that's another Green. Michael Green on the other side. Clips, you mentioned just before, and I think this is the case, and there's a guy on the Clippers that this would specifically impact. This could take on like a playoff feel tonight. And I guess the easiest place to start, if that's the case for me, is not Kawhi. It's actually Paul George. He's someone where you're much sharper than me in terms of projecting his minutes. Is this the type of game, though, that you could see him push like 32-ish minutes at 7,400? That would be a steal and a buy situation.
Yeah, I think so, because he had They had said he was limited. He played 30 minutes 2 games ago. Last game, he played 27 against OKC, but that was a game that wasn't really competitive. He subbed out with 3.5 minutes to go. So, I mean, even just looking at that, you were looking at 30 minutes. And, I think that there's no guarantee he plays more than 30 minutes here, but I always like situations like this where I feel comfortable at least giving him 30 minutes because we've seen him play that already, and this is a game that should be competitive and it matters. But there's at least some chance that they're just like, yeah, no, go ahead, play 33, play your 34, like get back to what you've been playing earlier in the year. So his price tag I think is basically adjusted now for him playing 27, 28 minutes. And the 30 minutes makes him look good, and the at least potential for him to get a little bit more than that is really appealing in this game.
Yeah, and he had a rough stretch. He was shooting awful. He's actually been really efficient in the last couple games, but there's been a couple blowouts in there, and I think maybe the minutes would even look better in this super short sample size recently. It's a pick 'em. It's a big game. I really like Paul George tonight. I think this is the spot to buy on him before the price rises.
Yeah, it just seems like where his price is and everything, it seems like at worst you're getting a good play, but there is just slate breaking potential if the minutes end up being there.
Yeah, and that's really what we're trying to do here. Going up to, of course, we've got Kawhi at 9,300, 9,200 over on FanDuel. What do you make of him? Kind of where do you prioritize him against the Rockets and some of the other top end plays on the slate?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's really interesting too because his price is down for him to basically play 31, 32 minutes. But in competitive games recently, you've been seeing 33 or 34. There's, again, certainly a chance that you get like 36 from him here in this matchup. So I think that obviously his rates go down when he's playing with George. Now you have Marcus Morris out there as well. Not that he's a high usage guy, but just another body that occasionally shoots. So the rates are a little bit lower than his average for the season, but I still think the price accounts for that. I think that he's a really high upside option. Right now we have ownership wise, he's third behind Harden and Westbrook, about a 14% difference between the two. I think he's a really good play if you can get there. It just comes down to, how do you prioritize Harden, Westbrook, Kawhi as guys you have to pay up for on a slate where there's not really good value.
And then for the rest of the Clippers, we've got Lou, Beverly, the bigs. I mean, I guess the question I want to ask, and then you can talk about those guys, is do you think the Clippers play small tonight? And then how do you prioritize the non-superstar? Harrell, of course, a lot of guys for the Clips.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting because we obviously don't know for sure how the Clippers rotation is going to go, but and Harrell, could stay on the floor, but it just makes a lot of sense, I think, for them to run lineups that have, like a Beverly, Williams, Morris, Kawhi, George, or something like that. And that, obviously would give a little bit more playing time to those guys. But potentially also to someone like JaMychal Green, who played 19 minutes last game against OKC. He didn't benefit from the garbage time, like he subbed out with those 3.5 minutes to go. But the interesting thing to me was that at that point, the lineup that the Clippers had out there was Beverly, George, Morris, Leonard, and JaMychal Green. So it was the lineup that I just said you could see them go to here against the Rockets, except they had Green in instead of Lou Williams. So just another guy where it's certainly not a high probability play, but at 3,300, if he goes from 18 minutes to 23 minutes or something, it puts him in that same category or same projection range as the PJ Tucker, Guillermo Hernan-Gomez type guys.
And I think it's pretty safe to say he's going to be significantly lower owned than a guy like PJ Tucker.
Right, no question.
So what do you make of Zubac then? Like, do you think this is a bad spot for him?
Yeah, I think it's awful.
Okay. Interesting. The guy, for me, Morris is interesting. He's got some ceiling to him. The floor is pretty bad. But if they run some of those type of lineups, he's the type of guy that could really impact in a game like this. Maybe they do give him an additional run. And then Lou Williams, of course, coming off the bench. Man, the Clips are a team, for being a really good team, I have no pulse on really what they want to do. I think it speaks to kind of how they can chameleon. but I'm really unsure of what we see tonight against the Rockets.
Yeah, I think what makes them, or part of what makes them such a good team, is what makes them so difficult in DFS, because
Yeah.
it's not like, oh, they run a 10-man rotation, but four of these guys just aren't going to do any. Like, they have 10 NBA players in their rotation basically, and depending on game flow and things, like, you can see just adjustments in minutes within a game, which makes it really difficult. You mentioned Morris. I do think maybe you see a couple more minutes for him in this matchup. The problem is that his price really isn't that cheap. He's only, or he is 5K on DraftKings. He's not getting much usage when you're playing with some combination of Kawhi, Williams, George, and Harrell. So it's still tough for me to get there, even though I do think that he potentially plays a little bit more.
Yeah, and then on Super Draft, real quick, Paul George is 1.45x. It's certainly my favorite play of everyone. We talked about Kawhi, like I said, 1x, not going to get there. I don't love that. Anything else on the second game here?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Moving on, we got the Sixers on the road in Sacramento. They're a 5-point underdog, which, you think, like, how is that possible? But then, like everyone, you look and it's the worst splits that you can see. 9-23 on the road, 28-2 at home. They're broken. They're hobbled. Not good times for the Lofties. We can start with them. I mean, it's an interesting situation. No Embiid, no Simmons. We've got Tobias. We've got Milton, Horford. A lot of bodies, not a clear rotation in my mind. What do you make of this Sixers squad?
Yeah, so Harris and Horford's salaries came back down a little bit on DraftKings, which starts to make them appealing. It's not a bad matchup against Sacramento, and obviously you should get tons of production on a per minute basis from them. You would expect, around 38 minutes from Harris, probably around 34 from Horford, who is much more productive when he's not playing alongside Embiid. So I think both of those guys look pretty good. The rest of Philly is tough. Right now we have Alec Burks for a ton of ownership, which I don't get. He's 5,300. He's, for whatever reason, just not really the guy in Philly. He didn't even sub in against the Lakers until the start of the second quarter. So as far as guys off the bench, you had Glenn Robinson, Furkan Korkmaz, Raul Neto, and Norvel Pell all sub into the game before Alec Burks did. He was the first guy off the bench, along with Glenn Robinson, in the second half, for whatever that's worth. And he closed the game. But it's just really, really difficult to trust that he plays more than like 22 to 24 minutes with how little they've looked to use him, and the salary isn't giving you any sort of a discount. So it's really tough to get there. Shake Milton's still expensive. He's playing big minutes when he's not in foul trouble, but he's priced up more so as a result of him shooting like he's Steph Curry, which isn't something that's going to continue. Korkmaz's price came up a little bit. Mike Scott played 36 minutes last game. He's still 3,800. That's still not something that's super appealing, but it is basically the same price point as PJ Tucker. And, right now we actually have Scott projected for 27% ownership, which sounds like a nightmare. But if he were to kind of drop down and Tucker goes up or something like that, then he'd be someone you could pivot to.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if he's going to get those minutes at that price, I get why he's garnering some ownership. So just to zoom out a bit, Jamal Murray or Shake Milton for you?
Jamal Murray.
Same. Okay. Yeah, he's, first of all, that guy gets in foul trouble. Like, it's never ending with him. And then in the other cheapies, I know you rattle off a bunch of them, and you talked about Scott a bit. Do you have interest in guys like Robinson? I mean, if he was towards the min, I think that would change things for me. He's flat 4K on DraftKings. Guys like Thibault, just really anyone else for the Sixers in terms of the value that we might say?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wish that Robinson were cheaper, because, for one, you mentioned in the Rockets game having to get it right twice, and it's the same thing with these secondary guys on Philly, because you really have no idea game to game which one of them is going to play more minutes. You got 31 minutes last game for Robinson. Prior to that, he's barely been in the rotation since coming over from Golden State. So you have to get him again playing close to 30 minutes and then actually producing. But the one thing that is appealing about him is that right now, for example, we have him at 6% ownership at 4K on DraftKings. You have Burks, like I said, at 23%. You have Korkmaz at 30% at 4,500. Because of the uncertainty among all of those guys, taking the lowest owned one certainly has some appeal.
Yeah, and I think on 4 games, listen, there's just not that many hidden situations you can reach, but that's usually a big mistake for guys that are out of rotations and whatnot. It's not like other sports. you're better off trying to find a team like we've talked about. There's a couple on the slate where it's annoying, but when you have uncertainty about how they play, the range of outcomes on some of these guys is gigantic. And I think Philly kind of fits that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, the problem is that just like Houston, the guys, you not only are you guessing their minutes, but they're not productive players either.
Yeah. And they're overowned.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's a situation that I would like to avoid as much as I can, but I also realize that, I've said probably 12 different times already on this show, I really don't want to play these guys that are really popular. And, they are projected for high ownership for a reason. And it's because you kind of need them to build your lineup.
That's what we provide in the NBA Strategy Show here on Thursdays. Chat, we hope you're having fun. If you guys can hit the like button, we do appreciate that. Before we roll to the Kings here.
More
all right.
guys I don't want to play.
Yeah, more guys. So De'Aaron Fox, he's got a Q tag. I think he's good to go, though. I'm just clicking on his little thing. It says probable. Oh, boy. We've got him. We've got Buddy Hield coming off the bench. Giles. Alex Len, I think, is a viable punt. I'm just kind of jumping around here. How do you organize the Kings as 5-point favorites at home?
Yeah, I think that their center rotation is another spot where it's not really consistent. 2 games ago, you got 20 minutes from Giles, 28 from Len. Giles was in foul trouble in that game, but the main point was, you got 48 minutes from them. Last game against Washington, you got 27 minutes from Giles, you got 14 from Len. So that was a lot of small ball. They closed against Washington with Bogdanovich, Barnes, Bielitsa, Fox, and Joseph. That is, a Washington team that was closing with Bertans and Rui as their 4 and 5. So it made sense. And now you're going to get a Philly team that is going to have, Horford. So maybe a chance that you get more like Alex Len and Giles combined minutes. They are both cheap. They are both very productive when they're on the floor. So those are 2 guys that I am actually more interested in taking shots on in tournaments. Only 12% projected ownership going to Giles and to Len. I really like guys like that so much more than guys like PJ Tucker and those players. I understand that Giles and Len are a little bit more expensive, but they're like, if you get their minutes right and you're on the right side of the variance there, you're pretty sure you're getting the production. Whereas, with these other guys, they have to actually outperform their typical production as well. So I think Giles and Len both look like high upside ways that you could differentiate, and just kind of hope that they combine for 48 minutes. I wouldn't play them together, of course.
No. Man, poor PJ Tucker. He's taken a beating on this show this morning, but what can you do? Other than that, so what do you make of Buddy Hield specifically? He's 5,900 on DraftKings. The volume would be there. He's a streaky shooter. We know he can get hot. He's the 3-point champ. Still bitter about not cashing that ticket. Do you have him, in terms of a tourney play, especially if he's not as popular?
Yeah, I like him. I don't really understand what happened against the Wizards. He was
your home account. You got to know these things,
right? I mean, he was in like half my lineups that day, which was fantastic. When he scored 30 DraftKings points in the first half, he played 1 rotation in the second half and never came back. So he ended up only playing 23 minutes in that game. I don't know what the deal was with the minutes, but typically you're going to get around 26 minutes with him coming off the bench. He's averaged about 1.2 points per minute since being benched in favor of Bogdanovich. And his salary is at a point where he's not a great median projection, but he still has a really high ceiling. And those players are always really, really appealing in tournaments because people just use optimizers and they're not going to get to him in an optimizer, but he can very easily be a guy that helps you win a tournament. So I like going back to Buddy Hield here and hoping that, he just gets those 26, 27 minutes. I think he's really similar to like Giles and Len in that the median projection isn't great because the minutes are a little lower than we would like, but he's such a productive player on a per minute basis that it's pretty easy for him to outperform his salary.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I don't think is discussed enough, that, if you have a guy who gets, say, just an elementary example, 30 points consistently, then you have another guy, say he gets, just for the example, 0 or 60 and it averages to 30. Those are 2 totally different things.
Right.
And Hield is certainly the latter in that example. It could go, he could kill you, but he has that break the slate ability. Whereas some of these other guys, more likely than not, they're just going to do their part, and then you'll have leverage elsewhere. So just try to balance your lineups as best you can. Bogdanovich, any feel on him? 5,500. I don't really have a strong take on it.
I don't really like him whenever Fox is playing. He takes a massive hit in terms of usage and assist percentage when he plays alongside Fox. So him coming into the starting lineup versus coming off the bench was a big difference. If Fox were to sit, Bogdanovich would go from being someone I'm not interested in to probably being my highest owned guy on the slate. But assuming Fox is in, I'm not really interested.
And then anything else? I mean, the Kings are one of those teams I really, even on a 4-gamer, I'm not looking to get a ton. I think Buddy Hield and Len, maybe for some value, is where I'd look to.
Yeah, it's pretty much Hield, Len, and Giles for me. Corey Joseph, played 27 minutes and closed the last game, but I don't think that's particularly likely. And again, even if it is, it's still Corey Joseph production, so probably who cares?
Like it. All right, 3 down, 1 to go. What do you say?
God, I am dreading this one too.
This one, I almost wish, when you have 4 games, one of my first thoughts is like, well, at least it's not like a 2 or 3 game slate. I almost wish this was just a 3-game slate and we could get rid of this.
When I went to do the podcast with Offie last night, I was like, oh, cool, it's 4 games. That'll be easy. And I pulled it up to see what teams are on it. And it's just like, oh, Golden State and Toronto who are playing each other.
Just miserable. But it is the last game. I really don't understand. I mean, some books don't have this game lined. I see on one of the sports books I'm looking at that the Raptors are an 8-point favorite, 225.5 in terms of the total. That could change rapidly either way. It depends on who's in and who's out. One guy we do know is in, though. I haven't said this in a really long time, is Steph Curry. He is back. Again, me projecting minutes, I certainly rely on the projections behind the paywall, which are fantastic. I would assume middling 20s for him is a pretty safe. It wasn't a leg injury or anything, but I can't believe that he would push for 30 plus minutes in his first game back. I guess we can start on the Golden State side. Do you have interest in Curry at 8K, or is the minutes not enough to get a ceiling?
No, I do have interest. It's very ownership dependent, obviously, because like you said, I'm expecting minutes in the mid 20s. Hope, maybe we'll hear something before lock, but if we don't, I'm assuming, mid 20s minutes. And he's expensive enough where he has to play really well, obviously, for him to pay off that salary in 26 minutes. But he played like 250 minutes last year without Cousins, Thompson, or Durant on the floor, and he averaged 1.86 DraftKings points per minute. So there's a ton of question marks here. Is he going to just come out firing in his first game back, or is he going to just kind of be out there getting his feet wet, in an NBA game again? Is he going to be productive playing, or as productive playing alongside the other guys that are terrible on this Golden State team? It's not a great matchup against Toronto. Like, there's all those question marks, but it's a 4-game slate with a lot of really questionable plays. And, right now, I don't think we have Curry projected for less than 1% ownership. I would assume that comes up, but I think he easily ends up being one of the lowest owned really good players on the slate.
Do you think there's any scenario where he could push for like 30 minutes?
The only reason that I would say it's more than 0 is that this game's in Golden State and it's not a lower body injury. And Kerr has the quotes about, kind of when asked like why Curry was even coming back, about having an obligation to play him for the fans and all that. So I would say more than 0% of the time he plays 30 minutes. I don't think it's much more than that.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Draymond's got a Q tag. Your guess is as good as mine. We've got Wiggins. I mean, what do you make for the rest of the Warriors?
One thing with Wiggins that I think is interesting is I expect him to be more efficient and produce at a better rate now that Curry's back. Obviously, it'll take some usage away from him, but we saw when he was in Minnesota that he was much more efficient when he played alongside Towns, and I expect to see more of the same thing here with Curry. He's just not someone that is very good at creating for himself, Wiggins that is, and it hurts him when he's playing alongside a bunch of guys that don't need to be really defended. So I think he becomes more efficient, and I think that there's a good chance that Curry's usage kind of comes more from all of these peripheral guys, more so than it comes from Wiggins. So I think that you see maybe a little bit better version of Wiggins. Still not saying that I think he's a great option on this particular slate, but it is at least something to keep an eye on going forward, because there was such a big difference in Minnesota. I think you would see that again here with Curry back.
Yeah, 7,900 over on FanDuel for Wiggins, 78 over on DraftKings. And it's true. I mean, we've seen time and time again, it's like, oh, Wiggins is the only guy. The volume is going to make up for the efficiency, and that just never happens with him. He's just not that kind of player. So is what it is. We'll see. I don't have a ton to say on this team. It's a frustrating team. It's a bad matchup. Curry coming back opens it up. If Draymond sits, does that change anything for you in the front court? Will it elevate some of these guys into your core?
I don't think so. Golden State just kind of like ebbs and flows as far as their value to DFS, and because they kind of go from like running 12-man rotations to running 8-man rotations back to running 12-man rotations, and Kerr's basically just played everyone that he can for a while now. And so even if Draymond's out, like, yeah, it opens up more minutes for guys like Toscano Anderson and Bender or Eric Paschall, but their prices have started to come up. Paschall's up to 5,800, Bender's at 39, Toscano Anderson's at 37, so they're both still cheap, but you're adding another body to the mix with Curry. They signed Chasen Randall, who got minutes the other day. So, you could, if I did anything, I would roll the dice with some Toscano Anderson or Bender, just kind of hoping to get a good game from them at a cheap salary, because they're not any worse than Eric Gordon and PJ Tucker, but it still wouldn't be anything that I think I really prioritize.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And listen, everyone knows it's a lost season for Golden State. I'm not stunned to see them using a ton of bodies just to try to find maybe a piece or two for what is going to be a pretty good team next year. The last question I want to ask you about the Warriors, and then we can go to the Raptors, is do you think Curry coming back will up the tempo for them at all?
I think that it's likely that it does, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think that's very possible as well. So then we go to the other side. Oh, man, it's just a graveyard. Van Vliet, Ibaka, Gasol, all Q tags. I mean, your guess is as good as mine. Do you have an inkling on organizing these Q tags, or is these – because I don't.
I don't either. Okay. Yeah, I mean, Gasol's finally listed as questionable, which he'd been out pretty early. But I'm guessing Gasol doesn't play. But as far as Van Vliet and Ibaka, I don't really have a good feel.
Neither do I. And listen, as you guys know, 5 p.m. NBA deep dive. These guys will be going after it. I don't know. Are you on the show today?
Yes.
Yes. So you'll get Ship My Money and other good people. And then live before lock, breaking this all down, you'll get the injury news. The dominoes will fall. Siakam, to me, is in play regardless of these dominoes. It doesn't really matter. Then you have Lowry, Powell, particularly, maybe a little more dependent. How do you prioritize kind of the top end options for the Raptors?
So if Van Vliet is out, it has a big impact on Norman Powell, who's playing 38 plus minutes in his absence. He would be a solid option. It has a positive impact on OG Anunoby as well, who's playing really, really big minutes. His salary has come up. 6,400 on DraftKings isn't really something I'd be getting to. Powell came up to 6,600 as well. So not as appealing as when he was, I think, 5,500 or something last slate. But you would get a lot of minutes for those guys if Van Vliet's out. Whereas if Van Vliet's in, you're certainly not even looking at them at their respective salaries. And then as far as Ibaka goes, that's even beyond whether or not he plays, you get the nightmare of what is the Toronto center rotation going to look like. We had been getting Rondae Hollis-Jefferson starting in Ibaka's place. Last game, you got Pascal Siakam starting in his place, and Patrick McCall joined the starting lineup. Chris Boucher started the second half after a good second quarter. Boucher ended up playing 29 minutes and absolutely breaking the slate and being someone that you needed. He was 1% owned, but basically won every one tournament. So my guess would be, after playing as well as he did in that game, that Boucher is the preferred option if Ibaka is out. He's still cheap. He's 4,300 on DraftKings. You just have to keep in mind that there's been a lot of games this year where we assume he's the guy and Nick Nurse has other ideas. So very easily could just go back to his 15-minute role as well. Yeah.
God, I feel like this guy is somehow, every time I have a slate with the Raptors, Boucher gets in the mix. Listen, I think you summed it up well. There's a lot of downside there. It's going to be if these dominoes fall right, though, he's going to be someone that's definitely worthy of the discussion. But, just to bring it back, like, where do you have, because Siakam to me is a tough guy to gauge. clearly he's in play. I think we all know that. But you've got so many appealing options right above him, and then there's kind of a dead zone, and then you have the balance builds. Can you get to him over guys like Kawhi in spots, or is it just when you go balanced here and there?
So I think Kawhi's the preferable option, but the one thing to look at is it's a very natural ownership pivot between the two. Kawhi's 9,300 on DraftKings, Siakam's 9,100. Siakam right now 5% ownership to 35 for Kawhi. Like, look, I prefer Kawhi, but I don't think that Siakam has trouble outscoring him 1 in 8 times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and listen, on 4 games, ownership like that becomes a factor. When you guys projected that close, and you're getting significant discounts, that's really what you need to lean to. It doesn't work every time, but over the long term, and this is coming from, anyone who played golf this week, when you have 65% own Rory McIlroy, those are things that you kind of have to take into account. But any final thoughts on this game and then the slate in general?
So just one other kind of add on to what you were just saying about the ownership is also to keep in mind, if you're playing a lot of lineups, pointing out that Siakam is lower owned relative to Leonard than he should be doesn't mean that you need to just like jam Siakam into 65% of your lineups and fade Kawhi. It's important to have a good balance in your lineups of ownership. And so it's basically just pointing out that in some builds, some of your like chalkier builds, going to Siakam over Kawhi is going to give you really good leverage over the field. It's not saying that you need to just like jam Siakam in everywhere because he's low owned. Also, as far as approaching Toronto, I'm assuming we don't have news before lock on sites that lock, obviously just it comes down to your risk aversion and then how you want to approach it. But on like DraftKings and late swap sites, I think that a good idea and the way I'll probably approach it will be to project Van Vliet and Ibaka in, because they are both cheap enough. Van Vliet at 6,500 and Ibaka at 6K that if I project them for their normal minutes, I'll be getting to a good amount of them, and that'll allow me to then swap down to whoever I need to swap to. Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, and that's obviously you want to plan ahead. Make scenarios, those if scenarios. Then over on Super Draft, you have Boucher at 1.85x. Depending on who opens up, there's going to be obvious value on some of these multipliers if the Raptors do in fact sit guys besides Gasol. Anything else? I think we did it. I think this was pretty good for what was a really good Clippers-Houston game, and then 3 games that I have just so little interest in.
Yeah. No, I think that's about it. I might even kind of walk back what I just said about Van Vliet and Ibaka and say I'm going to do that with Ibaka. I'm not sure if I'll do it with Van Vliet. Reason being that I don't know that there's guards in Van Vliet's range. Like if Van Vliet's out, I still don't love the pricing on Powell or OG. Whereas if Ibaka's out, I can just swap straight down to like Kyle Jefferson or Boucher.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, that's a little crowd, even though it's only 4 games. I keep going back to Jamal Murray's right there. Right. Even though I don't like Shake Milton. If Graham sits, you have Rozier in a similar range. So there are options.
Yeah. Like it makes it tough when because the opposing team against Toronto is Golden State. So like there's not a lot of plays that you like there. And then it's tough to swap to a lot of the Toronto guys. So I'll be projecting Ibaka in if we don't get news, just because I think it's really easy to swap to whoever is starting in his place. As far as Van Vliet goes, if I have him in lineups, then he's ruled out. It gets kind of messy.
Yeah. And listen, that's what we're going to have to do. And that's why, if you haven't signed up and you want to, NBA Strategy, promo code 50% off your first week. Get inside, check the projections, everything, behind the paywall. We encourage you to do that. Also encourage you to watch the shows later. There'll be more clarity on these situations. We want to give you a first look here and talk about maybe what could happen. But once we get confirmed injury news on these games, it'll become clearer. Check out the lines in Vegas, monitor those. That'll be some indication if we don't have word. If you see one of these lines steaming, something probably happened. So on that note, I think we can bounce on out of here. I'm going to get ready for a rousing day of college basketball. If any of you people are in the college basketball world, I have an article posted. I'll be in there betting a lot of bad games. You really should tail these, Adam. You should come on in to the college basketball streets in the betting world today.
Yeah, it's on the list of things for me to.
Yeah, it should be behind golf. We need to get you in golf. That's
golf and more consistently playing on Super Draft are at the top of the list of things that I need to start doing. And then I'll work on sports betting stuff.
Yes, top super draft at the top of my list. Is NHL still on your list, right? You've been doing that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good for you. So yeah, you're checking off some things. But chat, it's been fun. Really, guys, appreciate you hanging out with us. Thanks to Super Draft sponsoring the show. Adam will be back at 5 p.m. So good luck, everyone, and we'll see you next Thursday.